Returnal originally launched on the PS5 to the failure rally call of, but I was able to beat Dark Souls as if it was required to somehow play identically to those games, and it defeated quite a lot of gamers along the way. Returnal was a breath of fresh air, a recycling center for gameplay in the shape of Celine finding herself repeating the same event horizon exploration on a dying planet and dying again and again and again. The victim of some ancient, evil, cruel overlord who seemed to think that her dying a ton of times would bring them closer together like a sci-fi suicide pact. Let's see how Returnal has made the jump to the PC, and if it's done so, error-free. My brand is me, my sponsor is me. Subscribe if you like the videos. We're going to have a ton of stuff, including PlayStation VR items to review, more podcasts, more games coming up for review. It's going to be a busy time. Hit the notify all button. You, as Celine, an astronaut in charge of a high-tech space shuttle, crash lands on a transforming alien world. And she's cut off from all help and must now struggle to stay alive. She keeps dying and retrying and has to begin her quest over each time. As you play, you're going to learn that your arsenal evolves with each cycle of the game itself, much like the planet. Each iteration of the loop introduces fresh permutations, giving you the freedom to experiment with alternate tactics as you continue to battle. Returnal is, at its most basic, a third-person shooter with roguelike elements, which sees you consistently retrying as you work your way through the levels that also change subtly each time you play, finding story snippets and crashing static cutscenes and dreams, images piped into Celine's head by whatever it is that lives inside the very dirt of the planet. And that's the mystery and the meat that you need to figure out. But what made this game so good is the sublime characterization of bullet hell. Third person on console, resonating on PC, doesn't make the jump. First of all, mouse and keyboard movement allows for control that is magnified and honed to a razor-sharp laser beam of movement on the PC. Diving and dodging and slipping between alien death rays and robotic attacks feels almost seamless in Celine's control for every single input, though you can still play on the console controller if you want. I love the control on the PS5 originally, though you could tell that some adjustments had to be made for a controller-based system. Here, the jump in fidelity is larger than the light scale Celine supposedly traveled to arrive at the planet in the first place. Shooting and moving and switching to specials feels perfect. The game's infernal loop of positives and negatives for almost everything that you can and do see might bother some people, but it adds that complexity and helps the game immensely. And the control merged with that means that some of the choices that you make might be slightly different than the PlayStation 5 version. Adding a parasite with positive shield power and letting it reside in your suit might also destroy its ability to build up weapons power as quickly. Does that matter as much if you're doing mouse and keyboard versus the controller? Those are ideas that the devs had to make sure worked here. Each enemy group weirder and harder and more surprising in their attacks than the last. As you move from location to location on the planet, you have to consistently keep chugging away and changing your gameplay as you go. Your expectations, your idea of success may even alter. Where Returnal works so well is the debate between player and game. Whereas you learn the systems, barely sneaking through is acceptable. You think to yourself, all right, that got me through this spot, let's go to the next. We did that, let's move on. But unfortunately, you'll face a death, and then the next run, you expect just a bit more from yourself, a bit more on the next run, building each time. Seeing a new enemy causes you to reset that idea, but persistently causes you to experiment with what you've learned in a prior location. And that means that each moment of success carries a bit more weight as you move forward, not only in the current cycle, but honed to a fine edge here. It's Returnal's level design that does continue to resonate even after you're done exploring it. Some kind of ancient Elder Gods mason seems to have built everything. Ever-changing, with the only design plan that sticks through each iteration is to kill you. One of the few games where every single change still feels fresh, where you can tell it's from the same procedural well, though some later levels have a bit of a familiar look to them upon multiple replays, but you're consistently getting something of substance every time you dig. The only thing better than the creepy, overwrought, tangled worlds of Returnal was the gameplay itself. It's a tight exploration of that bullet hell feel, mixed with the science fiction, and it creates its own nomenclature the more you play it. Even the upgrades, that could be downgrades, attach questionable creatures onto your body for improvements, and it becomes this consistent diplomatic endeavor with you thinking, oh, you know what? I need to do this. I need to strap this onto myself, even if it changes or alters me in some other way. And the gameplay has rock-solid weaponry. It's dropped slowly throughout the game based on one of your stats. More and more types with different bonuses and special moves, all built somewhat into an overdrive and timed reload system that rewards players who care to use it, but it doesn't unduly impact those who don't. Any weapon type that you've obtained in previous levels are then accessible as loot in lower levels on another cycle, and battles that were difficult at first change their pace, with later weaponry available sooner. Graphically, Returnal looks outstanding. It already did, with its creepy mixture of otherworldly planetside romps and mysterious haunted house segments interspersed to consistently give you a moody, creepy vibe. Returnal has a ton of options, from various settings for the accuracy of ray tracing, shadows, textures, particles, and otherwise. It also has a large number of settings for resolution scaling, from the very basics to an in-engine version to DLSS and FSR. It doesn't seem to support DLSS 3 at this time. But that means you can also dial this in. The evil haunted house alien vibes of the game, even in the later, more fantastical parts of Returnal, sing. However, it's the color work to me that is exceptional. The deep, mysterious purples of arcane energies consistently draw your eye to the next location, where the red drop of a weapon sits enticingly just out of reach in a prairie that looks almost empty. But when facing enemies and seeing the yellow pulse of an angry power beam, it allows for the player to act almost instinctually, naturally, just to the colors that they see themselves, without having to always parse exactly what that experience may be on the other end until you get there at a later moment's time. And while you're killing and exploring, you get to see this alien and ancient world, stone monoliths etched with alien words tantalizingly translated slowly bit by bit for the main character's computer. Even as she's blasting across a ravine where alien grass blows in mysterious winds that are either the breath of some ancient creature or maybe just the impact force from one of the missiles behind you, you're always looking around, always taking it in, and it is incredible looking. Unfortunately, Returnal on the PC is not without its issues. While the game's requirements for 32 gigs of memory have been dropped, so does the game's apparent requirement for perfectly smooth gameplay. The game does unfortunately have some micro stutter, and it can pop up at the most inopportune times. Even with the 4090 or the 3080, it didn't ever cause a death, but it was noticeable, and you might see in some of this footage. This was running with 64 gigs of RAM on an SSD, as well as testing this on an NVMe with only the game installed. That being said, the game was hitting over 120 FPS with most settings on Epic, though I would suggest to a lot of gamers to check the ray tracing and shadow settings, because at mid and high, they look almost identical to Epic, and they can give you back a good deal of FPS, so check that out. While Returnal looks excellent, it does have some performance problems that can crop up. Speaking of performance, let's discuss that music. The music changes dynamically in response to the action on the screen at all times, adding this overall immersion and making each moment feel more intense and impactful, creepy. No matter where you're playing it and what you're doing, it does resonate with movie-style sci-fi alien vibes. The score has been composed to elevate the game's mood. It does so. The atmosphere and the ability of the soundtrack to reflect the state of the game and the player's journey through it is perfect. I love it. And luckily, once again, we get that excellent voice actress who catches that one fundamental of mystery that doesn't hit all the time, and that's audio entries. You know what I mean? Grabbing your MP3 Zune player and recording your death instead of taking care of something else, and characters having to pick it up later. Celine's voice actress nails it. As I said in the PlayStation 5 review, this is a character who's both secure in her powers somewhat, but aware that she's living in a space version of Twin Peaks, where everyone in the restaurant possesses energy weapons and wants to kill her. Celine's actress needs to finesse herself between the fine lines of an astronaut that is trained to see the worst things in the most inhospitable places mankind goes, but also needs to react to the idea of a space-time that's warped, of eldritch entities bent on destroying her, and her ability to somehow be scientifically unhinged and patiently nervous is incredible, and she does it throughout the game. And something else that is throughout the game masterful is the sound. It brings us to this moment. The game's directional cueing still hands down one of the greatest instances of good environmental sound occlusion we've seen. Locational reverb, echo, or the incorporation of effects into sound with side-chaining effects later on when things go a little bit weird to give you the alien feel. Environmental effects, adjustments, and improvements for the audio on the PC are here, meaning that every single enemy, above, below, or maybe even inside you, can be traced back to their physical form. Each sound they make or shot you fire is the first moment of an encounter that turns into this delicate dance of chaos and sound that somehow never gets muddled. Regardless if you're using headphones or a home theater, the sound is important in games, and Returnal's developers know that, prepared for it, and delivered it. But do they deliver on the fun factor? better controls, more graphical effects, some improvements to sound, well, a lot of improvements, as you can tell. And Returnal was fun originally. It takes bullet hell games, 2D or 3D affairs that are usually involving ships and specific tactics on a particular plane and turns them into 3D bounding and bouncing and balanced gameplay experiences just like it did on the PlayStation 5. Dancing between glowing orbs of enemy fire while consistently trying to inject your own pattern into the enemies so that you can hit them back is the masterwork of Returnal. And it works every time, no matter how difficult it is, and no matter how many times I died, I usually would just hold on for a second and then go back and start a new cycle. The game also, of course, has the patches and improvements that we saw on the original PlayStation, which includes co-op as well as an endless cycle version and the ability for you to save and then return to a game, which is something the game originally didn't have. So as you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for a sale, deep sale, or never touch it rating system. Everything I've played seems exactly where I expected it, except for that micro stutter, which is noticeable and did show up at really odd times. It was something that I thought was originally just the streaming, like when you went to a new location, but then sometimes you turn back around and go and see that again. And this is something that we may be seeing happen more often, especially when you get a game that really took advantage of the NVMe kind of performance and memory on the consoles and then jumps to PCs where not everybody has those. So anyway, that's it for me. If you get a chance, subscribe to the channel. As I always say, the biggest, worst mini boss in all of gaming is the YouTube algorithm, so helping me out by subscribing to the channel is awesome. It helps the channel continues to get those videos shown to you. Hit the notify all bell. Follow me on Jeremy Penner at Twitter. I'll be talking about the new games we're doing. And of course, the best gaming podcast at minimum on Fridays all the time, but sometimes a little bit early and sometimes 2 or 3 podcasts in a week. If you get a chance, iTunes, Spotify, any of the podcast entry locations that you can go to and websites, that's where we are. Follow us there. That's it for me. Peace out. Gang, gang.
Elapsed time, 30 minutes since last crash. Whole areas of this forest are rearranging themselves like a fluid puzzle after each of my... Whenever I return, per Astra Protocol, I will not be recovered until I reach the broadcast signal.